Support for this episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the beaches were copper, the pince-nez was golden, and the blaze was silver, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about the difference between Holmes's pipes? Or how often he smoked cigars versus cigarettes? Or what Egyptian cigarettes are like?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 215, Walking Sticks and Canes. Hello, and welcome once again to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look at some of the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready to tap, tap, tap down the street with your top hat on and your cane in hand? I can see you there in your tie and tails.
Oh, I didn't get all of your message. I got this little candy cane that's sort of white and red and about 6 inches long. Now I feel foolish, but I do have my top hat on.
Well, Bert, one does simply not put on the Ritz with a candy cane. So please. Well, clearly I have stifled or stymied Bert there. We will take the opportunity to remind.
Actually, I was just remembering how many women over the years when I was dating told me exactly the same thing. You can't put on the Ritz, buddy, they would say, with just a little trace of asperity in their tone. You can't put on the Ritz with a candy can.
Putting on your Ritz. Okay. The show notes for this episode are available at iHost.co/trifles215. All lowercase. That will take you to this show's specific notes for episode 215 on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. There you can find, links that we may have mentioned. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month. We do appreciate all of the patrons we've been getting in. Thank you so much for participating in this little exercise we have here, and we hope that it brings you joy. And if it does bring you joy, why not rate or review the show on Apple Podcasts? It would help other people like you find what you're enjoying. Thanks. Well, walking sticks and canes. This is interesting because we're in an age now where when you see someone walking along with a stick in hand, a cane in hand, it's usually because they are elderly or infirm. And it could range from the standard cane to the old, the four-legged cane to the walker. I mean, there's all sorts of ways. Or you've even seen the walkers with the handbrakes and the wheels now, where people are really getting fancy. Or those that you can sit down on. But this is part of the history of the walking stick, the cane, and other accoutrements that help people remain mobile. But let's talk a little bit about the function of walking sticks for gentlemen in Victorian society and where we might find them in the canon. So, Bert, where should we start with our investigation here of walking sticks or walking canes?
Well, we could certainly start with the references in the canon, and it would be, and there are many ways to go about this, just to find references or mentions of sticks. And it is fascinating how frequently a stick was mentioned in the context of some situation or some character in the canon. So it's really very much a part of Victorian life, walking sticks and canes. But there are a couple of cases that are really fundamental to Sherlock Holmes, where great deductions are drawn from sticks that are left behind in some cases or in the possession of people, and I think we should probably start there.
Okay. Well, let's start with the most famous one that I can think of, at least, and that is in The Hound of the Baskervilles. This is it's really the opening scene where Watson finds Holmes sitting at the breakfast table, even before Watson got up. He said, Mr. Sherlock Holmes was usually very late in the morning, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he was up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. And Watson was seated behind him and picked up, he says, the stick which our visitor had left behind him the night before. It was a fine, thick piece of wood, bulbous-headed, of the sort which is known as a Penang lawyer. Just under the head was a broad silver band nearly an inch across, to James Mortimer, M.R.C.S., from his friends of the C.C.H., was engraved upon it, with the date 1884. It was just such a stick as the old-fashioned family practitioner used to carry, dignified, solid, reassuring. So that's the opening paragraph of The Hound of the Baskervilles.
I love that. And of course, we will shortly get some great deductions drawn from that stick. But the Penang lawyer, I have a couple of canes. I suppose I probably have half a dozen. And I would love to add a Penang lawyer to my collection. And they're very, very hard to find. Denny Dobry, who has a lovely recreation of the sitting room at his home in Reading, Pennsylvania, has a lovely one. And he acquired that from looking online and visiting antique shops over the years. And they're very hard to find. And I have sort of a small Penang lawyer, but not the great. And often you'll see a cane that has a large round or oblong weighted handle. And that's really the shape of the Penang lawyer. It's in the hand. It's very comfortable to hold and quite substantial. And it's made from a palm. And what happens is you get this sort of palm branch. And I think my memory is what they did was they would scrape it with not sandpaper. Of course, they didn't have sandpaper, I don't think, in those days, but they'd scrape it with glass or something like that and make it very smooth. And you'd take off the outer bark, but no more. And so it's from the standpoint of wooden walking sticks, it's quite unusual.
It is unusual, and it really does kind of hint at the object's use as an article of defense or assault. In looking, I've always been puzzled by the name. I say, well, I've got a Penang lawyer. Oh, really? Is he helping out at the impeachment trial? I mean, where does one come across a Penang lawyer? And it seems like, it would be the ultimate in judge, jury, and executioner if you ran across someone in a street fight and you had your Penang lawyer take care of business. But an interesting entry in languagehat.com suggests that this is interpreted from the Malay Penang liar, Pinang liar. It's kind of a description of that East Asiatic palm, the Liquala acatiphyta. But it suggests a fanciful misinterpretation of the Malay pronunciation, they say. And the article on Liquala acatiphyta on Wikipedia says that the Liquala is the source of cane for the walking stick. It's nicknamed Penang lawyer by colonials, probably from the Malay phrase Penang liar for the wild areca, although, they say, the term may also refer to the use of these canes as deadly knob carries to assassinate litigious enemies. So, if you want to settle out of court, find a nice piece of cane with a heavy end to it, and mission accomplished. Case dismissed.
Interesting. I had not known that. I actually have a couple of Irish blackthorns that were called knobkerries, but they're not really identical to the Penang Lawyer, at least the ones I have. But also, I should mention, if you want to see a Penang Lawyer, open up your copy of the Hound, and there is that lovely Sidney Paget illustration of Holmes examining the Penang Lawyer by the window, and it was nice that Paget drew the right sort of stick. Mm-hmm. That was really very good.
And of course, Holmes looks at the Penang Lawyer and makes all sorts of deductions, not only from the inscription on that broad silver band, but also about the companion of James Mortimer, MRCS, the curly-haired spaniel. Because of the teeth marks and how far apart the teeth marks were, to kind of insinuate what the size of the jaw of the dog was, as well as the placement on up and down the shaft of the cane, because, as we stated, that this would have been quite heavy at the end where you keep your hand, and a smaller dog would have had to grip that probably closer to the end where you hold your hand, closer to where the weight was. A larger dog could have accommodated it a little farther down. So yes. Some interesting deductions there from Holmes with respect to the Penang Lawyer.
Yes, but in a paper that was written and published about 10 years or 15 years later, Violet Hunter proved a great match between the outline of those teeth marks and the bite of young Edward Rucastle. So apparently the stick had gotten around.
Well, we find a Penang Lawyer in one other story in the canon. Do you know who possessed a Penang Lawyer? Who else?
Another Penang Lawyer.
Yeah. It's a good trick question for future Sherlockian Society events.
It is. It's not in the Norwood Builder, is it?
No, it's not. We'll get to the Norwood Builder shortly.
No. Well, then I don't know. Oh, wait a minute. It's now it comes to me. It must be in Silver Blaze.
Yes. Who owned the Penang Lawyer?
I think it was Desborough, wasn't it? Desborough?
No,
Desborough was represented by a Penang Lawyer before the Racing Commission.
No, it was Colonel,
what's his name?
Straker.
Oh, John Straker?
Yeah. His wet clothing showed that he had been out in the storm the night before, and his stick, which was a Penang Lawyer weighted with lead, was just such a... Oh, excuse me, not Straker. They assumed that the stick weighted with lead might, by repeated blows, have inflicted the terrible injuries to which Straker succumbed. It was the racetrack tout, Fitzroy Simpson, who owned that Penang Lawyer. So...
Oh, interesting. I'd forgotten all about that.
Yeah, so an interesting bit of trivia there. So, interestingly, with these two instances, we have a Penang Lawyer. It's a type of walking stick or cane that can ostensibly be used as a weapon. Couple more instances of weaponry when we come back right after this quick word. You know, we say the Baker Street Journal is an irregular quarterly of Sherlockiana, but the fact is you can count on the Baker Street Journal to arrive in your mailbox if you're a regular subscriber 5 times a year. That's once a quarter plus the Christmas annual. And each time it arrives, it has a regular array of features such as the editor's gas lamp, Art in the Blood, the Commonplace Book, Baker Street Inventory, and more. And of course, peppered throughout are insightful articles and scholarship that make the world of Sherlock Holmes come alive to people around the world as they try their hand at finding out deeper details about some of the minutiae in the stories or about Victorian life. If you don't yet, please consider a subscription to the Baker Street Journal. Go to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and make sure you get your regular delivery of the journal today. And we are back talking about walking sticks, canes, and other associated objects to help people get about. Well, we mentioned the Penang lawyer, that's fine, but there were a couple of other instances of sticks being used as weapons, specifically as a cudgel. And this is interesting because a cudgel makes its way into the canon quite frequently, and interestingly as a verb, where someone says they cudgeled their heads to come up with a particular conclusion, right? They racked their brains. Well, a cudgel is essentially a short stick that's got some kind of weight to it, and a walking stick, a riding crop, any kind of, obviously Penang lawyer, like we just mentioned, would be appropriate in those instances. But to me, the most prominent instance of a cudgel was in the Abbey Grange, where you've got Sir Eustace Brackenstall was dressed in his shirt and trousers, his favorite blackthorn cudgel in his hand. That's how he approached the quote unquote burglars, according to the story of Lady Brackenstall and Captain Crocker, who of course made it up. But given Sir Eustace's brutish behavior, it would not be untoward to picture him with a cudgel in hand.
Yeah, very menacing. And then there's the Gloria Scott, which I think is another cudgel-like reference. And there we have somewhat mysteriously the stick features because it bears initials that particular character is trying to erase. But my memory of that is that the stick wasn't very old, and so why he would go to the trouble of putting his initials on it in the first place.
No, I don't think his initials were on the stick. I think his initials were on his arm. But he had been given the stick in recent order and then had taken pains, Holmes said, to drill a hole in it and fill it with lead. Right? So he created a cudgel out of it.
Right. That's right.
A stand-in Penang lawyer, which obviously told Holmes that he was preparing for some sort of assault. He needed to defend himself. So that observation was pretty keen with respect to Trevor Sr.'s cane.
I find that whole procedure somewhat mysterious. I mean, let's say for the sake of argument that I had a stick made of the right wood and so on, and what I said to myself was, I really want to make the head heavier so it's more of a weapon. I just can't figure out exactly how I would drill and then pour hot lead in anywhere such that it didn't wind up looking like a mess. Maybe that's just me.
Well, if it's a cane or a stick that doesn't have a crooked, a curved handle, if it's just a straight stick with a knob on top, it's a matter of just drilling straight down into it and dropping some lead down in there,
pouring some hot lead in there.
Yeah. Of course, I don't know, and this is completely off the beaten track, but what kind of tools does Trevor have to have around to melt lead and pour it into a cane at his house? I mean, is he an amateur blacksmith of sorts?
Well, in those days, though, I think hot lead was more widely available. I mean, there were cast military figures. You could make your own bullets. I'm sure some people, were making their own bullets and putting their cartridges together.
That's true. Well, and hopefully he had some sort of ladle that was cast iron or something that would allow him to do that. So, well, interesting. A couple of other instances of cudgels in the canon, and these two are interesting to me because they both are associated with men who are trying to look intimidating. In the first case, in Lady Frances Carfax, we have the Honorable Philip Green, who is very concerned about Lady Frances Carfax and her whereabouts. And Holmes says Watson says his hand was on my throat and my senses were nearly gone. before an unshaven French ouvrier in a blue blouse darted out from a cabaret opposite with a cudgel in his hand and struck my assailant on a sharp crack over the forearm. Right, so that was Holmes in disguise, of course. He stood for an instant fuming with rage and uncertain whether he would renew his attack. Then, with a snarl of anger, he left me, entered the cottage from which I had just come. I turned to thank my preserver, who stood beside me in the roadway. "Well, Watson," he said, "a pretty hash you've made of it. I rather think you'd better come back with me to London by the night express." So in that case, it was Holmes defending Watson against the vicious Honorable Philip Green, in that assault. And then in Shoscombe Old Place, they come across Sir Robert, who says, "Who the devil are you, and what are you doing upon my property?" And then as Holmes returned no answer, he took a couple steps forward and raised a heavy stick which he carried. "Do you hear me? Who are you? What are you doing here?" His cudgel quivered in the air. And I guess Enoch Drebber, in A Study in Scarlet, carried an oak cudgel. Again, somebody who was very concerned about being attacked at any moment by Jefferson Hope as he was hot on Drebber and Stangerson's heels. So, a very formidable weapon, a cudgel was. But this is part of the lore of walking sticks and canes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's a wonderful subject, and over the years there have been so many memorable sticks. One of the things that just always struck me was in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, Billy Wilder's film, Robert Stephens as Holmes carried a toolkit, a most remarkable gadget cane that had all sorts of tools and useful things in it that Holmes would use. And I always thought that was wonderful. I always tried to find out who created that for the picture, but I never was able to find that out. And then over the years, too, there was a great television series called The Prisoner with Patrick McGowan many years ago. And number 2, the evil, the mysterious head of the village had a seat stick. I always thought a seat stick was really interesting, an umbrella that you could use the handle, and it had a special device you could put on the end of it so it wouldn't sink into the wet ground, and you could open up the handle and sit on it. I always thought that was wonderful until I got one and found out that it was generally useless and extremely uncomfortable. And then, of course, there's John Steed, with his wangy handle umbrella that Mycroft Holmes, Mark Gatiss, when he plays Mycroft, carries one of those. So it's interesting, these iconic sticks and umbrellas and so on over the years.
Well, and there's that scene in The Final Problem by Granada where, Holmes has taken the pistol out of his dressing gown pocket, placed it on the table. Moriarty's about to leave, and it looks like Holmes may actually go to put his hand on the pistol. Moriarty turns, he has his stick with him, and he twists it, and you hear a click. And I don't know if it showed, because I'm a little rusty on that, but my assumption is that there was a blade there, or that it was some sort of gun itself. And he kind of placed it over Holmes's pistol there to keep him from picking it up. So, again, another multifaceted stick in the possession of someone who needed to protect himself or to cause harm to others.
Yes. Well, my friend Michael Barton has wonderful things in his collection, among which is, if memory serves, sort of an air gun that can be carried as a stick. And it just shows you the amazing ingenuity of Victorian craftspeople who could put all sorts of things, design and fit and create and craft and carve fascinating things into sticks, which makes them much more than just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Just seen the time, my boy. You must get home.
Oh, thank you. I had a stick with me.
I wonder where she put it.
Rather a heavy walking stick. It belonged to my father.
Never mind. I'll take good care of it until we meet again. After all, I shall be seeing a great deal of you now, I hope.
Indeed you shall, sir.